Fun. This is it. It's incredible that you guys have stayed going for the full day. You know, we fueled you up with food. You guys have gone on your own. I saw this incredible improvisation happening upstairs where people were dancing and jumping and hooting and hollering. It was quite amazing, and it triggers in my head. I've got to learn more about agile improvisation because it's rather incredible. As we start to shift to our final keynote, I just want to remind you guys of our retrospective. We have the retrospective wall in the back, and I don't know, there's like 4 Post-it notes, okay? 4. Come on, guys, we're Agilists. We're better than that, right? So what we've done is we put little Post-it notes on your table, and so if you could be so kind to put in some feedback, 1 idea per Post-it. You guys already know that. And what you want to put on is something that's gone really well, and maybe something that maybe you want to improve on, or us to improve on. So if you would, write some of those ideas down, and when we're done with David's talk, I would really ask if you can just stick those up there. Help us out with planning our next Agile Camp, and we'd very much appreciate that. So please use the stickies. So a guy who really doesn't need much of my naive introduction, to be quite frank. I'm just so grateful to have been able to read through his book, Kanban, and I think a lot of you guys have seen this in some way or another. See how that works? Yeah, worked pretty good. David Anderson has just been just one of those individuals in our community that continues to give back to the Lean Kanban community, whose courses in the LKU have continued to help us grow as individuals, and who continues to help press the ideas about Kanban, what the value is behind Kanban systems. This coming week, there's the Lean Kanban conference that's happening in San Francisco, and so with that, David was kind enough to drop by and say a few words for us. I won't go so much more into introductions. I think having him speak is a lot more valuable than me just babbling on. So with that, David Anderson.
Is the microphone working? That's better. Thank you. All right, Kanban, an alternative approach to agility. And why is it that I'm, now more than a decade, the rebel in the Agile community who likes to push different ideas? Well, first of all, sometimes unconventional alternative approach may be required. That the conventional wisdom might have been around for years, decades, centuries, sometimes millennium, and it's not working as well as people would like to pretend that it's working. So it turns out that there's an inspirational story for us in the work and life and career and achievements of one of the 20th century's greatest philosophers. Here he is. Mr. Bruce Lee, degree in philosophy from the University of Washington in Seattle, and therefore actually a philosopher, better known for his Chinese martial arts career. And there's some parallels in the approach that Lee took to martial arts and the fact that he rebelled against 3,000 years of how martial arts was taught in what we've been doing with Kanban. So what was it that Bruce Lee was upset with, and why did he have to take an alternative approach to teaching martial arts? Well, those of you like me who don't know that much about Chinese martial arts probably learned what you know from watching the Kung Fu Panda movie with your kids. And you'll know from that movie that there are 4 different styles of Kung Fu named after the characters in the movie: tiger, mantis, monkey, snake. Well, if you look up the Wikipedia page, you'll discover that there are actually more than 60 listed traditional styles. Now, the characters in the movie are all highlighted here. All 4 of them appear in this list of traditional styles. And if we can get the clicker to work properly, there they are, all 4. If you scroll down this Wikipedia page, there continues another list of what are described as modern or hybrid styles, and there are more than 40 of those. There are well over 100 different styles of Kung Fu, to use the modern second half of the 20th century term for it. So Bruce Lee came along and he said, they're all wrong. There is no one style that's better than another, and the whole business of competing with which one is the best style and my style is better than yours, this is not helpful. So he went as far as to describe the learning of pattern styles which are learned by practicing individual kata, by practicing the individual moves that make up the collection that goes into the pattern style. He referred to this activity as dryland swimming. Now you have to recognize that someone needs to have a certain ethos to be capable of influencing a community in this way. If he hadn't been Bruce Lee and he hadn't been brilliant, he would have been seen as a crank. But it was his level of expertise that enabled him to have the ethos to be able to say, you know what, I'm rejecting all these old ways. In fact, I think they're dryland swimming. And if that's what you're doing, you're someone who knows how to swim in theory, but if I throw you in the water, you'll probably drown. And Lee's concern was primarily that martial artists could be black belts, they could be competition champions, and it made them cocky, it made them arrogant. And maybe they'd get caught in a situation in an alley in Hong Kong where some gangsters might jump out on them and they think, well, you know, we are black belts at martial arts. We'll just take these guys on. And that's what got them killed. So he came to the conclusion that if you want to teach someone to be good at street fighting, you need a different approach. Now that approach eventually became known as Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do stands for the way of the intercepting fist. It's just one move that was particularly popular with Bruce Lee, and when he was put under pressure to give his method a name, he named it after that move. But he went further as to say Jeet Kune Do was, the philosophy of it was that you use no way as way. So there is no pattern style in Jeet Kune Do. The way is to reject pattern styles. And then he went further and he said that there should be no limitation as our limitation. And this was a tribal message to largely old Chinese guys who taught martial arts for a living. Because he was saying, you know what, it doesn't need to be Chinese to be a good idea. And he started adopting other good ideas like épée fencing, moves from épée fencing, into his style of martial arts. In other words, he was willing to adopt an idea created by white men in Europe, and that was okay. So he's permission giving with this message. So he's trying to change the entire mindset of how people learn martial arts. He's rejecting pattern styles, and he's also saying, you know what? It doesn't need to be Chinese tradition. We can pick up on other good ideas if they work for us and they help us, particularly if it avoids us from getting killed in a street fight. So his idea, he used a lot of metaphors. He's a philosopher after all. And he'd say, imagine that you fill a glass with water and you pour out of it that which you don't care for and you keep the rest. So he said, absorb that which is useful, discard the remainder. So practice new moves, new techniques, and if they work for you, keep practicing them. And if they don't work for you and you don't like it, just reject it, leave it behind and try something else. And gradually from that practice, your own personal style of martial arts will emerge. And the style for you will be very different from the style for anyone else. And of course, this makes it very hard to teach. Just last week, I met a woman that I've known actually for quite a few years. She grew up in Bellevue, Washington. And she was telling me that in her 30s, she started training Jeet Kune Do with one of Bruce Lee's former sparring partners from when Bruce Lee was at college at the University of Washington in Seattle. So this old Seattle-based Chinese guy who taught Jeet Kune Do. And she was explaining to me what they did in the lessons. And it pretty much amounted to just repeating things hundreds of times over. Sets of 100 moves 3 or 4 times per week for a particular move in order to learn exactly how it would work for you. Now, at the very beginning of our learning, the master broke a piece of wood in front of her, and she said, "Wow, that's amazing. Can you show me how to do it?" And he said, "No, I can't." And she went home thinking, man, he's so arrogant that he's not prepared to teach, some young, blonde, Caucasian woman how to do it. Well, several years later, she was very capable of doing this, and there was people from all over the world visiting for a training course. This was relevant to the story she was telling me because some of them were from Scotland, and she thought I would enjoy hearing the story. So the master called her out to the front, and he held up the wooden board, and he said, "Hit it." And she hit it and broke it in two. And most of the rest of the people in the audience were like, "Whoa." And afterwards they came up to her and they said, "Can you tell me how you did that?" And she said, "No." So later that evening, the master had said to her, "You understand now why I told you why I couldn't teach you how to do it?" And she says, "Yes. Because the only way to learn how to do it was to practice doing it. You couldn't just teach someone by theory, because even knowing the theory wouldn't enable them to break the board in half." So at the core of it is an evolutionary approach. And what enabled this evolutionary approach in the 1960s was adapting protective clothing. And so here's an example of 2 sparring partners with some protective clothing practicing some Jeet Kune Do. And quite elaborate innovation had to go into developing the protective clothing. Extra padded baseball mitts, the use of fencing helmets, for example, so that your sparring partner can kick you in the face 100 times. Right, so the problem with the kata is that they're not adaptive. That a pattern style doesn't evolve. A 2,000-year-old pattern style is the way it was 2,000 years ago. The same set of kata in it. And if someone took a kata out and replaced it with a different one, it got a new name. It became a new pattern style. Right, are you guys recognizing this and resonating with it? TDD, STDD, ATDD, BDD. Right, how many more pattern styles do we actually need to have in Agile before maybe we work out that copying a pattern style isn't the right approach to be running your business? Right, so Lee's genius was recognizing that hand-to-hand combat and street fighting is a complex problem. That pattern styles work very well in controlled environments like competitions. If you're fighting a guy and you know the guy on the other side's playing by the same rules you're playing by, then a pattern style's perfectly good. But if you can't predict the rules the other guy's playing by, or there are no rules, then what you actually need is an adaptive method, and your practices need to be emergent. So, how many of you work in an environment where the rules are sufficiently constrained that you can predict the future outcomes? And how many of you live in environments where actually the environment's changing around you and the way you do business seems to change every 6 months or a year or every 2 years? I know that that's the kind of business I run. If you look at my business from 6 years ago, we've had to change what we do and how we do it every couple of years because the market moves around us. We need to be adaptive, and our practices and our service offerings need to be emergent. So the message here is, why do we need an unconventional approach for improving agility? Right, so second part of this presentation, motivation for the Kanban method. Traditional change, traditional transitions, which pretty much all agile consulting companies are selling. They might be selling you an agile method, but they're selling you a traditional way of getting there. This model of moving from A to B, and there should be an A and B on this diagram, and I don't know why they haven't popped up. Well, let's go back. There we are. This whole business of going from your current process definition, let's call that A, to the target process, B. And that target process might be something that's defined, that comes out of a textbook. It could be Scrum, for example. Or it could be designed by the consultants. They come along with some target processing designing method like value stream mapping or the theory of constraints thinking processes or the CMMI model. And they do some sort of analysis on what you're currently doing, and they say, well, that's obviously not good enough and there are many bad elements there. We'll just design those out and we'll design the nirvana destination process. And then we'll help you transition from A to B. And the transition comes with a plan, it comes with training, it comes with coaching, it comes with perhaps other related assets to help the adoption. It comes with a budget, and it usually comes with a time frame, and therefore on some fixed date in the future, you will have transitioned to the magic Agile process B, and we'll know that we've arrived because we can run a checklist of, are you doing all the practices? We tick all those boxes. We see we've completed it on time. We've hopefully underspent the budget. And at that point, we can declare, we are now agile. And the project is finished, and the consultants leave. This transition model's been around since the McKinsey company was formed in the 1920s. This is McKinsey's change management method. And this is the method that your Agile consultants will be selling you. They're selling you a 100-year-old transition method to deliver new 21st century, highly adaptive Agile processes. But they're not selling it to you in a highly adaptive kind of a way. They're selling it to you in a big planning up front kind of a way. And I've spent 12 years on stages like this one, telling people this is wrong. And we're still doing it. So, Daniel Kahneman, this is a little bit of an aside for some background, has given us a simple model for understanding why this transition model doesn't work very well. Coincidentally, the success rate on that A to B style transition model is about 10%, maybe less. The other 90% either fail or produce very lackluster results and fail to deliver the business benefit that the consultants promised would appear when you hit destination B. We're actually worse at doing transition initiatives than we are at projects in general. So why is that? Well, Kahneman said that our brain works in the following way. There's like two parts to it. There's system one, which is our sensory perception. All our sensing, our sight, our hearing, everything that goes into the amygdala in the brain. And it's pattern matched, and it happens very fast. So that's the fast part of the brain. In about a millisecond, your brain takes in all this information, matches it against things it knows, and has some form of response. So you walk into an elevator, and you smell something in the elevator, and it reminds you of an ex-girlfriend because the woman who just got out the elevator had the same perfume, and the scent was left behind. Your brain recognizes that in a millisecond. The problem with System 1 is it's very slow to learn. The only way System 1 learns is by rewiring the brain. It is a chemical process. The neural pathways have to be strengthened or weakened. And it takes days, weeks, months, or years, depending on the individual and the particular situation. Jeet Kune Do is a System 1 style learning mechanism. So it's always learning by experience. So the other part of the brain is system 2. This is our frontal cortex, our logical inference engine. And it's very slow. It's also incredibly error-prone. We are lousy in comparison with, say, pocket calculators. They are much better than us. They're faster and they're way more accurate. But the good news about System 2 is it's fast to learn because it's learning from theory. And if System 2 is making a mistake, you show it the theory, you explain to it where the mistake is being made, and largely it will learn that and stop making a mistake. If you've ever had an 8-year-old sitting at the kitchen table doing long division for her homework, and she makes a mistake, my eldest, when she was 8 years old, liked to move the answer by 1 decimal place. You explain the theory behind that as a parent, and she corrects her homework, corrects the mistake, and after 4 nights of doing that, she wasn't making that mistake anymore. And it's fast to learn. So how do we, if we know this background, let's apply that to change management. We're about to transition to our new designed process. Beautiful. The consultants have been here, and they are so much smarter than we are. And we roll this out to our people, and we have some team members from our office here. We have carbon-based life form. But recently, it's been terribly difficult to recruit JavaScript developers. So we've had to augment the workforce with some of his colleagues here, silicon-based life form. So when we roll out the change initiative with the consultants, silicon-based life form, he processes all the information about the proposed changes with his system 2, because he doesn't have a system 1. And he comes to the conclusion that it makes complete logical sense, and he's on board with it. Meanwhile, carbon-based life form here, he feels the change emotionally using system 1, decides that he doesn't really like it too much, and that if he's going to adapt to it at all, it's going to be very slowly. Why is this? Well, we have this fundamental sense of identity, our self-image, the way we evaluate our self-esteem, our egos. We're part of social groups. Pretty much all warm-blooded vertebrate animals on the planet form social groups. Social groups have hierarchies. They also have identities. And if we feel that the identity of our social group has been attacked, or our position in the hierarchy of the social group is threatened, then System 1 processes that in a millisecond and decides that it does not like it. And what happens in your brain is that System 1 turns off the signal coming back from System 2. Because the information goes in, it finds its way over to System 2, and System 2 looks at it and said, you know, David, it makes pretty good logical sense to me. I think we should do it. And System 1's saying, I'm not listening. I'm not listening to you anymore because I don't like it. And the thing is, you can't do anything with System 2 can't do anything. If I do this with my arm, System 1 made that happen. If I move my arm back down again, System 1 made that happen too. You cannot do anything unless System 1 agrees to do it. And if System 1 has decided it's not listening to System 2 because it feels its identity has just been threatened, or its social group membership and identity has been threatened, it stops listening. Every software development methodology, including all agile processes, define roles and responsibilities. They fundamentally provide you with new identities and new social groups. And therefore, at least 70 to 80% of the workforce are going to have a negative reaction to the suggestion that they get a new identity. And if you force it on them, and eventually they embrace it, so let's say 4 years ago you forced it on them and now they're Scrum Masters. If you try to do that again, they're going to say, no, I'm a Scrum Master. I don't want to change to be something else. Once they've embraced a new identity, they're not going to want another one. That's where the resistance comes from. In other words, that target process B, whether it's a defined thing out of a textbook or a designed thing by the genius consultants who've paid lots of money, that target process is incompatible with human nature in terms of its adoption. The McKinsey-style transition model from the 1920s is incompatible with 21st century work. Knowledge workers, at least as long as those knowledge workers are carbon-based life forms, which is at least the remainder of my working life. So the Kanban method, like Jeet Kune Do and Bruce Lee, rejected the traditional approach to change. When I wrote my first book, the Agile Management book, halfway through writing the manuscript, I knew I was writing the wrong book. I was writing a book solving the wrong problem, but I had a contract and a deadline with the publisher, and the book was finished and it was published. That book didn't solve the problem, but already I'd identified the problem. That was in 2002. And I've been working on this ever since. All right, so we believe it's better to avoid resistance than to push harder against it. The Kanban method is designed for carbon-based life forms. That's the big differentiator. Right. The idea is to catalyze improvement through the use of Kanban systems. So just like Jeet Kune Do is named after one move that was a particularly popular one with Bruce Lee, the Kanban method is named after one thing that we happen to do in there, which is use virtual Kanban systems and the use of visual boards. Right, so anyone who thinks that Kanban is just about the use of a Kanban system or a visual board is mistaken. It's a lot more than that. It's about completely rejecting 100 years of how we manage change in organizations. And part of Bruce Lee's philosophy, this is almost certainly inspired from Taoism. He talks a lot about water. There's a whole section on his book of philosophy called Striking Thoughts around the concept of flow. And he said, teaching martial artists, he says you should be like water. Well, in 2009, a guy called Joe Campbell blogged the idea that Kanban should be like water. Water flows around the rock, and the rock is a metaphor for resistance. In martial arts, the resistance is coming from the opponent. For us, the resistance is coming from system one inside our carbon-based life form here. So we need to be able to flow around that resistance to avoid invoking that emotional resistance. Avoid attacking the identity of the individual or the identity of his social groups or his standing in those social groups. So, the Kanban method has these principles. Start with what you do now. Agree to pursue evolutionary change and initially respect the roles, responsibilities, and job titles of everyone concerned. And then encourage acts of leadership at all levels. The first three of these principles are specifically chosen in order to avoid this emotional resistance problem. Those of you who have read the book will know that this list wasn't in chapter 2 of the book. And that's something that needs corrected in a future edition. We also want people to start to view their organization as an ecosystem of services. If you're managing a modern business, a 21st century knowledge worker business or a creative business, a business where people think for a living, we want you to think of that as an ecosystem of services. That doesn't mean that you should reorganize your company. That would be against the first principle. Start with what you do now. Do not reorganize. But imagine you have a special pair of glasses and you can put these glasses on, and now you can look around the organization and you can see it as an ecosystem of services rather than as, for example, a portfolio of projects. That will enable you to apply Kanban thinking to the organization and to make it better. So think of Kanban, think of your organization as creative work is service-oriented. Service delivery involves a workflow. The workflow involves a series of knowledge discovery activities, things you do to learn stuff that enables you to deliver whatever your customer wanted. And then if you can do that, you can map that knowledge discovery workflow and you can start to model it as a Kanban system. You can visualize it on a board and we can start to figure out how to make that better. Don't change the organization, change the way you think about it. We've recently introduced this acronym for what I formerly called the system thinking approach to introducing Kanban. We teach this in our foundation level class. It's the second day of that 2-day class. And you'll see that for each service you've identified, so you put on the glasses, you've looked around and you've said, system architects, you're obviously a shared service. We are going to Kanban you. Understand sources of dissatisfaction, both internal and external. Why are the customers of the system architects unhappy, or why are the system architects unhappy? Because if there's no unhappiness, there is no emotional motivation for change. If people are not unhappy, leave it alone. Then we're going to analyze the demand. So what do we ask our system architects for? How much do we ask for? How frequently? At what rate? And how good are they at actually responding back? What's their capability? And there ought to be a mismatch between those two, because if there isn't, there's no good reason for people to be unhappy. Then we're going to model that workflow. We're going to look to see if there are different classes of service being provided in the service delivery. We're going to make sure that we capture that. And then we'll design the Kanban system and its visualization. And then we'll figure out a plan for rolling that out. But all we're really doing here is shedding light on what already goes on. It's way less intrusive than replacing your existing working practices with a new set. So for those of you in the audience who haven't encountered Kanban at all, just a few basic things. Here's an example of a workflow for a software development group. And we've got a visualization, a board that could be on the wall. And in this example, these little circles are, oh, that's not what we wanted. Does this have I just pressed the wrong button. Right. Laser pointer, right. These little circles here are supposed to represent magnets on this magnetic whiteboard. So the magnets here are actually the Kanban. They are the signals. And you see that we've created 5 of them for our input buffer. 2 of them are here and they're marked green as done, which means they're ready to be pulled to the development. And there are 3 empty ones. That's a signal to say that we could replenish 3 ideas from our pool of ideas to start them. So in this example, we've got physical Kanban. We're also using position on the board. When something is finished, we move it down here in order to indicate this is finished and it can be pulled to the next stage. All right, so physical token is a magnet, that's the Kanban. The colors are used to denote the state of the item of work associated with that Kanban. All right, we move items down to signal that they're done. We also change the color. And occasionally, we might override. So in this case, we're blocking this item A here. This is not working very well. And we're replacing it with item I, which is a different color of ticket, and that's an indication that this one's very urgent. We're expediting this one. And the people who were working on item A, they've had to stop working on that to work on item I. We're visualizing that this way. So that's what all these pop-ups say here. This board here is a functional equivalent of the previous one. These 2 boards are identical. Can everyone see that? The difference is that the Kanban are now virtual. Right? The Kanban are now displayed as numbers at the top of the columns. That's really the only difference. We're not using, there's one other difference. We're not using vertical position to signal done. We're now using horizontal position to signal that something is done and pullable to the next stage. So these two pictures are functional equivalents. The done column here is not a different state. It's still in development. The Kanban for development still apply to it. That's a very common mistake that people put different limits on these. Kanban systems are pull systems. So this is obviously directly inspired from manufacturing and the adaptation of Kanban systems into Toyota in 1947 or thereabouts. So in this example, we've got 5 Kanban in test ready. That means we have some space and we can pull this ticket in here. And that means that we now have 1 space in development, so we can pull this ticket into development. We can start working on it. And we have 4 spaces free in the input buffer for the whole system. And that enables us to replenish from our pool of ideas and start some new things. And only these items on the board are the ones that are committed. Everything else is uncommitted. So a key idea in Kanban is that commitment is deferred until something is brought into the Kanban system. So the point of commitment is when a ticket is pulled into the input buffer. Until then, back here, we haven't agreed to do it yet. Don't have time to get into this in the keynote speech, but this is the hardest thing in Kanban, right? That's why we train Kanban coaching professionals, so that they can coach people through the psychological challenge of this deferred commitment technique. And why Kanban isn't as simple as just doing the Kanban, why we teach risk management ideas, why we use different classes of service in Kanban systems. Because all of these are tactics to get business people to feel comfortable that it's okay that the item in the backlog here is still uncommitted. Because if they're not comfortable with that, they're going to resist the adoption of the Kanban system, and we don't want resistance. Right? We want to figure out how to avoid the resistance. And if we can't avoid it, we want to find ways of emotionally motivating people to get on board with it. Right, so we're committing to getting started. That should mean we're certain we want to take delivery. There's an English author and management consultant called Stephen Bungay, and he calls this point here the Spice Girls question. Because this is where you ask the business, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. And if you're sure that you really, really want it, then we promise to really, really do it for you. So that means we wish to avoid aborting after commitment. If we find that tickets on here get aborted, that's an indication you weren't sure you really, really wanted it. So why did you ask for it? Why did we commit to it? Why did we waste time and energy doing it? Ideas should remain optional and ideally unprioritized. I don't have time to get into why they ideally unprioritized. Take my word for it for now. One of the ways to motivate people to get on board with this concept of delayed commitment, deferred commitment, is to get people to study either the abandonment rate in their backlog, because things just fester there for years, or if they're more explicit about it, what's the actual discard rate? The reject rate of ideas that never actually get committed and built. Well, the first ever one of these that we did with a group in IT at Microsoft in 2004 up in Redmond and also in Hyderabad, they had a 48% discard rate prior to implementing Kanban. So about 50% of what the customers, finance, HR, security, facilities, were asking them for was never getting done. They were developing requirements, business cases, but they were never getting done. Well, if half the stuff that you put energy into never actually gets done, why would you commit to it early? Why not defer commitment until later that you're absolutely sure you want it? So it's a way of motivating people to get on board with deferred commitment. What I've done now is I've moved the commitment point to the middle of the board. So we have the downstream committed work to the right-hand side, and we have the upstream uncommitted work, and this is options. We're developing options, we're taking ideas and we're elaborating them. And at any time, we can throw these options away, we can reject them. This is known as upstream Kanban, and it typically has a minimum and a maximum limit because we want to have a minimum number of options to choose from, but we don't want to have too many because we don't have an infinite amount of money to spend on marketing and strategic planning. So we have this cost of acquiring options as we move from the left to the right, and naturally we'd like to spend as little money figuring out whether we should reject it or not. So being able to do an upstream Kanban and put some minimum and maximum limits and some understanding of what did it cost to move things across these columns puts some governance in the upstream activity. This is often quite revolutionary for many businesses. They've got lots of governance on the downstream activity, but the only governance on the upstream activity is the annual budget for the chief marketing officer. All right, we can get a lot smarter at how we're governing the development and the selection and rejection of options. Just one or two more dynamics of Kanban systems for this talk. The commitment frequency, how often we replenish our input buffer for the Kanban system and make commitments, is a core idea in defining agility, this frequency of how often we can talk with business owners and select things that need to be committed and worked on. So the frequency of doing this will depend on the transaction and coordination cost of holding the meeting to make the decision, but it will also depend on the information arrival rate in the environment. If you invite business owners to a meeting once a week and they all turn up and say, "We don't know anything new since last week. Why the heck are we here?" You may as well have the meeting every 2 weeks and make the input buffer larger. If information arrives infrequently, you don't need to interact with the business too often. If new information arrives frequently, you need to interact with them more often. And if the transaction and coordination cost of holding that meeting is expensive, then to deliver the agility you need to figure out how to make the meeting easier to hold and faster so you can do it more frequently. Well, it turns out that replenishing Kanban systems is really very simple. So you can hold the meetings quickly. One of the early examples was a startup that Janice Linden Reed worked for in San Francisco in 2007, 8, 9. Their planning meetings for their sprints were taking them 2 days every 3 weeks. They adopted Kanban in their replenishment meeting for what they called the top 10 meeting, the selection of the 10 things in a buffer. Usually when there's only 1 or 2 slots free in that top 10, they held that meeting in 20 minutes. They reduced a 2-day planning session to 20 minutes. That allows you to do it way more often. Now, they only went from 3 weeks to every 1 week, but if it's every 20 minutes, if it's only 20 minutes, you could do it faster. So the message here is that frequent commitment is more agile, and on-demand commitment would be most agile. The XIT group at Microsoft in 2005 achieved this. They're one of the few businesses doing Kanban I've ever seen achieve on-demand commitment. Then we have the lead time through the Kanban system. So the clock starts ticking when we make the commitment, and it will stop ticking when it exits the Kanban system. If we're only looking at the span of the Kanban system lead time, that's when we hit the first infinite queue, because the infinite queue is the end of the Kanban system. Then there's the delivery frequency. How often are we flushing this buffer of finished work to our customers? Right, so the delivery frequency or delivery cadence. And again, the transaction and coordination cost of doing the delivery will control how often we want to do it. But nowadays, IT guys are pretty good at driving those costs down and doing things like automated deployment. Well, that means you could do it every day, on demand if you like. But can your customer take delivery every day? If you're working in a retail bank, for example, do those retail bankers out in the branches want new software from you guys every day or every week? Probably not. Not least of which is they don't trust you because most of the shit you've delivered in the past was full of bugs and cost them a lot of time and heartache. So they'd rather take the buggy, shitty code once every 3 months than every day. You see how this works? Improve the quality of your code first, then propose that you deliver more often. Right, so frequent deployment is more agile, and on-demand deployment, on-demand delivery would be the most agile. So if you could do on-demand replenishment, very short lead times, and on-demand delivery, you'd be really, really fast to respond to requests. Fantastic. So service delivery agility is this concept of frequent commitment, short lead times, and delivery frequency. And if you wanted to measure how agile are we, you'd want to look at how fast can we do these three things. So if we group these, these are arrows, commitment. If we're very fast, if we can do frequent commitment, if we can do short lead times, if we can do frequent delivery, we would say that we're a very agile business. On the other hand, if we just did we've seldom committed, we had long lead times, and we delivered very seldom, then we're not agile. So now we've got a scale for measuring how agile are we, and this is an outcome-based way of assessing our agility. It's not a checklist with a list of, are we pair programming, are we doing, automated tests, and, it's not a checklist. Right. And you'll recognize that these are Kanban system dynamics that I walked you through on the last 3 slides. So that's how Kanban systems affect a single service delivery. But what about the Kanban method? Well, the idea is that could we treat each service that we can see in our organization, and a group of programmers developing user stories inside a project, let's call them the user story development service. Just because they're inside a project doesn't mean you can't think in a service-oriented way. So what we have here is a set of services in our business unit. I'm drawing 3 because if I drew, say, 10 or 15, it would look very complex. But these real-world examples exist. There's a woman from Brazil here in San Francisco next week who's nominated for our Brickle Key Award. She works for Petrobras, South America's largest company. She's led an initiative which has been going for 5 years inside one and now several business units at Petrobras. The first business unit had 10 interdependent Kanban systems. And that's institutionalized and has revolutionized the way that particular business unit delivers oil exploration application software. So, multiple services that we treat individually from a Kanban system perspective. Then we have feedback loops, and in the Kanban method there are 3 of these. The stand-up meeting, which we expect people to do daily, perhaps more often, but daily is typical. Something we call the service delivery review, and then the operations review that happens monthly, service delivery review weekly. So what are these? Well, a stand-up meeting Pretty common in the Agile community. I don't need to explain this to you, but the way we do stand-up meetings in Kanban is different from Scrum. That there's a tendency to focus on the work rather than the workers, and as you get more mature at it, to focus on why is the work not flowing, what's blocking it. Because the status of everything is on the board. Why would you review the status in the meeting? And what's actually most important is what came to be known as the after meetings. The recognition that from standing in front of the board every day, we see what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and then we decide we'll talk about what's not working and do something about it. A service delivery review is a weekly quantitative assessment of the same thing, looking at what's the demand coming in to our service, what's our capability to supply, and in this example here, I have lead time distributions. So the lead time through the system for different requests, we look at the distribution of those and we compare things like the average time to deliver, the 85th percentile in the data set. Perhaps we have a service level expectation or a service level agreement, and we compare how well we're doing with what's actually expected of us from the customer, and we discuss what we might do about improving. Operations reviews are monthly, and these are the system of system level meetings. You might expect this for a whole business unit, where each of the 10 Kanban systems in the business unit presents the information they might otherwise present at the service delivery review, but they're now presenting it to a much wider audience so that you can look at interdependency effects between the different Kanban systems, the different groups, and you get business unit level improvement suggestions that help you gradually level out. So what's happening is that your ecosystem of services evolves, and the feedback loops are what make it evolve. So the many interdependencies here, where one group may not be servicing another group fast enough, that information gets flushed out at the operations review. In the Kanban book, I describe operations review as the keystone to a successful Kanban implementation. How many people here do Kanban of some form or another in their company? Keep your hand up if you're doing an operations review. 2, 4, 6. About 6 of you. That's great, actually. That's the highest percentage I've ever had. But I've been evangelizing the operations review publicly for, at least 3 years. So, Kanban's 6 specific practices, the things you need to implement in your organization to make this work. You need to be able to visualize invisible work, visualize the workflows, and visualize the business risks associated with those work items. Implement virtual Kanban systems, manage the flow through those systems. Make policies in your organization explicit so you can talk about the effects they're having on the way work is done and your observed capability. It's really not difficult for managers to create policy that really screw things up. I had a guy work for me back in the days when I had a real job, and he was the manager of the business analyst department. And he issued a memo to say that as he was the best analyst in the building, all their work had to be personally reviewed by him before he would approve it for use downstream. That was a 1,300-person company with about 350 million in turnover. And he, with that one email memo, had just made himself the entire corporate bottleneck. The ability for that business to improve through the deployment of new IT systems was now constrained by his personal ability to review requirements. Policies written by managers really affect the outcomes. And that's why my company sells management training. We're not a process improvement company. We don't sell processes and we don't sell process improvement. What we sell is management training. We teach managers to manage better, and it's why we renamed our conference that's happening next week in San Francisco as Modern Management Methods, because it's managers that make a difference, or the biggest difference. And if you don't believe me, go read Software Engineering Economics by Barry Boehm, published in 1981. The conclusion of that book, round about page 580, is that by far the biggest leverage on improving the productivity of software development activities is to improve the managers. And here we are 33 years later, and most managers I know in high-tech companies, the only training they get is how to avoid being in court. And I know you're all laughing because you've been through those training courses, right? So what else do we have on the list? Implement the Kanban kata, and then finally, educate your workforce to enable a collaborative evolution of policies and ways of working. And there's a list of ways you might educate them. I don't buy this idea that your workforce are stupid. They're not stupid. They've all got very high IQs. They've got university educations. You trust them to build really innovative and powerful technology products, to make lots of decisions every day about the product and the way that it works. And yet somehow we believe that these people don't know how to make the work better. We bring in consultants from the outside and books with processes written in them, and we say, you guys aren't clever enough to work this shit out for yourself, so just follow the process from somebody else's book. And fundamentally, I think that's wrong. Your workforce know better how they should be working than anyone else, providing you give them the right frame for thinking about it and the right education and models to understand it, just like everything else that they do for a living. It didn't come by magic. It came through education, and it came through the provision of models, and it came through practice in doing it. And if you do those things with your workforce, you will get that Kaizen culture, that continuous improving culture that exists at Toyota. Because the great mistake of the lean movement from Boston is to think that the Toyota production system is a process. It is a management method. Right. Toyota have a different way of managing their company. But when you send an industrial engineer or an academic industrial engineer from America to Japan to study it, what he looks for is industrial engineering processes, and that's what they wrote down. What Toyota do and why they call it the Toyota way, Toyota do, is that it's a management approach. Right, so if you have this evolutionary approach, the idea that you start with what you do now and you make a change, how do you know that the new change is better? All right, I'll speak loud while the AV guy sorts this out. So, how do you know that the change is an improvement? Well, in evolutionary biology, a mutation of one species for another will thrive and survive if it's better for its environment. So what we need to understand is whether our new process is better than the old one. All right. So here we have pizza delivery boy. Anyone ever order pizza for delivery? Order it for your office, for your home. What represents fitness for purpose from your pizza delivery service? Maybe how fast they deliver, whether it's nice, tasty pizza, whether, if you ordered pepperoni, you don't want ham and pineapple. Right? So you care about functional quality and non-functional quality. Do you care about the predictability of the delivery? If they promise you a half an hour, is it acceptable if it takes them an hour? Probably not. Do you care whether pizza delivery boy broke any traffic laws on the way to delivering your pizza? Probably not. You know, ethically speaking, we probably should, but we don't. Do you care whether the restaurant meets health and safety regulations? Oh, yes, you do. It turns out these 4 are commonly recurring for most services: delivery time, quality, predictability, and safety. And in different circumstances, there will be different thresholds. This is lead time histogram data from the CME groups, 9X Exchange, 2 different development teams maintaining different trading floor systems. I got this data from Raymond Keating, who's a manager at the 9X and their IT group. And System A and System B are 2 different departments maintaining 2 different systems. And you look at this lead time, you'll see most of these things are delivered in 5 to 10 days, but some of them take 70. And System B, many things in 5 to 10 days, some of them take as much as 30. Obviously, System B is faster on average, and the tail on the distribution is a lot shorter. But which one of these 2 departments is fitter for purpose? The answer is we do not know. From this data, we do not know, because they're effectively in 2 different environments. Now, it turns out that they do have information. They have customers and they have service level expectations defined with those customers for the lead time of delivery of change requests for these systems. And if we plot that, so the top 2 are the same, now we have the bottom 2. 0 on this distribution here represents on time against the service level expectation. A negative number means early delivery, and a positive number is late delivery. What we can learn from that is that System B delivers 5 out of 7 things on time, and System A only 3 out of 7. The conclusion we can make from that then is that System B is fitter for purpose than System A. That there's more room for improvement with System A than there is with B. 5 out of 7 still isn't stellar. They could do better than that. So imagine now we've got process A, our current process, and we make a mutation of it. We can evaluate the fitness. We make a change. Our process is evolving. We continue to evaluate the fitness with the same metrics, the same outcome-driven, service delivery-related metrics. And this time we discover that this version actually wasn't an improvement on the old version. We could roll back to the previous version. A process change could be something as simple as rubbing away a Kanban limit and changing the number. And then to change it back, you just rub it off and change it back to the old number. But it's also equally valid in evolution to simply roll forward. And you continue to evaluate the fitness, and you keep going, evaluating the fitness, discovering whether we're fitter than we were earlier. The point here is there is no end point. You are never done. Just like you're never done with Jeet Kune Do. So in an evolutionary system, you can't do the checklist thing. It just doesn't fit that McKinsey change management model. So we might define business agility this way, that our business needs an ability to sense what's going on in the outside environment. We need to be able to segment our markets, identify different customers, different customer segments, and understand what represents the fitness criteria for them. Because you think about that pizza delivery service, there is a product component to fitness. There's whether you had the right pizza, the right flavor of pizza, and there's whether the pizza was tasty and delivered hot. So there's a functional and non-functional quality, and that relates to the product. But the product alone isn't enough. There's a service delivery component that's important. And my observation of Silicon Valley for the last 30 or 40 years is that Silicon Valley is very obsessed with fitness for purpose of the product and tends to reward socially innovation in product, but hasn't paid a great deal of attention to fitness for purpose of service delivery, and doesn't reward that in the social groups here. But the customers care about it, at least in many circumstances. If Silicon Valley delivered pizza, then it might be very nice, tasty pizza with very exotic flavors to choose from, but it could be cold on delivery, it could be very unpredictable on delivery, and I'm going to suggest that health and safety wouldn't be a big concern. So we need an ability to sense, and then we need an ability to respond. So our service delivery time and our ability to do evolutionary changes, because if things are changing in the outside environment, we need to be able to change quickly, or we might not exist anymore because someone else that changes faster than us will steal our business. So if we visualize that, we have the sensing idea, and we've got defining our fitness criteria, being able to sample those from our markets and being able to understand them. If we can do that frequently and understand them with good quality, then we're more agile. And then the Kanban kata, to have feedback loops in place so that our internal processes adjust to the changing fitness criteria from outside. If we're good at that, if we're strong at it, then we're very agile. And if we're not, then we're less agile. And then on the response side, if our service delivery agility from early in the presentation, if that's strong, then we're more agile. And if it's not, if it's weak, we're less agile. And our ability to do evolutionary changes, how often are our processes changing? If that's frequent, then we're more agile. And if it's not, we're less. So with these two frames, we have a way of judging just how agile are we. And the Kanban method is a way of moving in this direction. Right? It's a way of achieving these results. I'm not going to tell you it's the only way, but at this point, it's now a very well proven way of doing this. And you've seen some glimpses into what I'd call the bleeding edge of Kanban land. The expansion into wider business and starting to understand external factors like fitness criteria for market segments. The Kanban method isn't just for IT. Right? This is a way of running your modern, creative knowledge worker business, a business where people think for a living. So in conclusion, Kanban helps you manage your organization as an ecosystem of of creative services. I apologize for the typo there. Kanban enables you to improve your business agility through evolutionary improvement and significantly reduced resistance to change in comparison to trying to install a patterned style, a defined methodology. And Kanban improves the survivability of your business by making it resilient to rapidly changing external environment. And I'm going to guess that many of you work for companies where you have a rapidly changing external environment. And resilience through business agility is critical to long-term success. So with that, a brief reminder about next week's conference. Please encourage your boss to come. We're still open for registration. lkna.leankanban.com. And thank you.